So the next 90-day stretch, I think, is not only important for Bitcoin. I think it's one of the most consequential points in Bitcoin's history right now. And of course, a lot of people are going to say, "Oh, every 90 days is really important for Bitcoin." But I think we've almost been accustomed to sell the news now lately. But this next 90-day stretch is going to be more than just one bullish or bearish news. So we just had the Clarity Act pass the Senate floor, which means basically it's just moving on to the next round. So in this next 90 days, there's going to be two more rounds that are going to need to be held up. And Senator Cynthia Lummis has said, if this Clarity Act doesn't get passed by August, September time, it won't get passed till 2030 because we're going to have the midterm elections in the United States later this year. And then, the next 2 years, everybody's going to be looking at the next presidential election. So I think we're going to see potentially 2 to 3 more things come out of the Clarity Act. And I think the Trump administration is a lot about symbolism. So I wouldn't be surprised if they really try to push to get this all passed by, America's 250th anniversary on July 4th. So that's coming in. And then we also, within that same week, we had Kevin Warsh, the new Fed chair, come in, who's been obviously like in Trump's corner. And everybody's assuming that he's just going to come in and cut rates to zero right away. I don't necessarily think that. He's been really, against all of this inflation. But something interesting that he said throughout this entire time was that he wants to shrink the Fed's balance sheet, that he really wants to, kind of move in and, shrink the Fed's balance sheet, but also cut interest rates. So he wants to do quantitative tightening with quantitative easing at the same exact time. So you're like, how the hell is this actually going to work? And his whole thing is that AI is going to boom productivity, and thus, AI is going to hold up for a lot of the, changes that we're going to see in just the overall dynamics of the market. And so within this next 90 days, not only do we have the Clarity Act needing to go through a few more stages, we have, the first Fed meeting of Kevin Warsh. So everybody's going to be looking at his tone, basically, right? I mean, before it was a meme, is Jerome Powell coming out with a purple or red or orange or whatever color tie he's doing? People are going to be doing the same exact thing with Kevin Warsh, but they're going to be diving into the transcripts to really understand where his head is at as far as lowering interest rate. But the wrinkle in all of this here, Robin, is that Jerome Powell hasn't left the Fed. He's just stepping down from the Fed chair, so to speak, right? His run there is over, but he still has votes in all of these FOMC meetings on whether or not they raise or lower interest rates all the way through January 2030. So he's still going to be here for the next 2.5 years. And he's been very adamant to try to keep his Volcker moment where he wants to keep interest rates very high. So there's going to be an interesting dynamic playing out where, Warsh has come in and said he wants a quote regime change with all of this. And he wants to move in to more of, cutting interest rates, keeping everything low, keeping money cheap. And there's going to be basically these two factors playing out, which I think is going to carry over into the institutional side of things. I mean, we've been talking about MSTR this whole time. And, one thing that they've been able to do is get money cheap. One thing that was evident in 2025 with a lot of these institutions coming on board and buying Bitcoin is that they were able to get money cheap. And when interest rates are lower, institutions are able to get that money. And then it makes sense to go buy Bitcoin. The one thing I think holding a lot of these institutions back is that the Clarity Act has, been around for, been tossed around for a little bit. And Bitcoin has been looked at as as similar to gold in a sense, but it's not written in stone, so to speak. So say another administration comes in and they're advent or they're against Bitcoin, they could essentially just scratch that whole thing out and say Bitcoin is more of a security or something like that, and it's just more difficult. There's more regulations. Maybe another administration comes in and tries to do choke point 3.0. I mean, there's endless possibilities that comes in when you essentially cycle in a new administration every couple of years in the United States. So a lot of these businesses maybe have been like, all right, we're going to watch this institutional experiment play out for a couple years and, see how it really goes. And they've seen a lot of these institutions get hammered here recently with buying around 120, 100 plus thousand and seeing it dip a little bit. and they've been cautious, and maybe they've been like, okay, the price action is one thing, but the other thing is like we don't know how this is going to develop long term as far as like Bitcoin goes through regulations and everything like that. So the two factors I think I'm looking at are, all right, well, is Warsh going to really cut interest rates, and are the administration going to basically write Bitcoin as in stone, setting it on the same playing field as gold? And if that's the case, then institutions who maybe been teetering on the side can now have easy access to capital and thus buy more Bitcoin. And we've been seeing basically Strategy being the one of the few companies that have been buying Bitcoin. And that's basically what propped up the market in 2025. So I'll be looking for that in the next 90 days to really take off. And then that means, a bullish Q4, I think, to really say the least, if this all gets passed. And then companies really have to sit themselves down and look, see what Strategy is doing, maybe not being able to replicate it like we've lined out here earlier in this, but also saying, okay, it's better than having cash on our balance sheet. Maybe they actually start to buy Stretch on their balance sheet, right? And say, okay, you know what, Strategy is not going to get hammered. We can have a 10 to 13% dividend, and we're going to let the big dog, Michael Saylor, just start to play the Bitcoin game for us. And then, over time, that's just going to develop into, this institutional arm getting more solidified. And, as Bitcoiners, obviously, we don't need institutions to come in and buy Bitcoin, but I think it just adds that validity, like we've seen with the ETFs. Now people really have that, I guess, multiple touch points before they actually, maybe pull the trigger and buy Bitcoin. And I think eventually everybody's going to see all these companies buying Bitcoin, all of these, governments here down the line, and they're going to start to really look at it. And then it's going to turn into what we've seen with gold, with a lot of these central banks not wanting to buy the ETFs, a lot of these individuals wanting to hold physical gold. And then I think we'll see an outpour of the ETFs. But it all starting here in these next 90 days, because if not, then I think that timeline will be delayed for at least another, 3 to 4 years.
I think it's so interesting what's going on in Bitcoin. I think we could. Are you bullish on 2026? Like, are you? Because I'm kind of excited for the end of 2026.
Yeah, I mean, I think, like Bitcoin's in this interesting spot where everybody thinks the bull market's over. We've had, if you just look at the math, right, institutions are buying 450 Bitcoin or more a week, right? So, I mean, are the sellers going to get exhausted? I think we've seen a lot of the Bitcoin miners move into AI. I think just over time, right? I mean, as long as there's not a bunch of paper Bitcoin sitting on the market, a lot of these people are going to start waking up to the fact. And like I said, I think that towards the end of this year, I'm pretty confident the Clarity Act's going to get passed. The only thing holding it up is like this stablecoin yield type of argument that Jamie Dimon and Brian Armstrong are yelling at each other about. And at the end of the day, Bitcoin doesn't care about any of that. If Bitcoin comes in and is, able to, whether that part gets axed or is in or whatever, I think really doesn't matter for the Bitcoin side of things. So I think all of that is just, more nuanced. And I think, when you look at how this is all going to get passed, Brian Armstrong just really wants to pad his own bags and, get all of those dividends coming in from Circle buying the US treasuries and everything like that. And maybe we can get into the mechanics of what Coinbase is doing here too, if you want. But I think at the end of the day, I'm extremely bullish on Bitcoin, especially when it comes to later in this year, which at this point, I'm baking in that the Clarity Act gets passed. And I mean, it's not just me saying this either. Citibank, one of the largest banks who's just getting into Bitcoin, has said that if the Clarity Act's passed, their end of year target is 145,000, I believe, which is double the Bitcoin price right now. So, and that's an institution who's been in the game for a while. So I think that being said, right, it's not just these bullish YouTubers coming in and yelling at you, hey, Bitcoin's going to go up by the end of the year. It's some of the biggest institutions in the world now saying this.
Yeah, it's we sometimes get like, oh, you just say that because you want Bitcoin to go up. No, we are saying that because we think Bitcoin is going up. Like that's a very important like nuance there. Like we didn't just like buy Bitcoin, then talk about it to pump it, because like I don't know, like have you heard that once in a while, or like you want to just pump your bags? I'm like, how influential do you think I am that I can pump the Bitcoin price? Like
Yeah,
I'm
I
not
mean,
that
let's
big of a
face
deal.
it. Yeah, let's face it, Robin. I mean, like you and I, like, I mean, you have a great show here. I mean, I create content and all this, but how much is our pool realistically? I mean, a lot of the market was being driven by institutions. And, if institutions listen to my show or listen to your show, that's great. But I don't think at the end of the day, people are really, billion-dollar hedge funds plus are like listening to us and saying, okay, you know what? Just because Brandon at Green Candle said that Bitcoin's going to go to $1 million a coin in the next five years, I'm going to go all in on it right now. I think that they've got to do a lot more due diligence and everything like that. I've tried to encourage some of my friends, and I don't have enough influence to even get a lot of my family members into Bitcoin. So, I mean, I'm just blowing hot air into a microphone. And, if people want to say, okay, I'm trying to pump my own bags, I'm glad you think I have that much influence. And like Robin here, I'm glad you guys think that we have that much influence. But at the end of the day, it's a $1.5 trillion asset. If you go in, even if you buy 10 Bitcoin, that's not really going to move the market, right? I mean, Michael Saylor sold 32 Bitcoin. If you have enough capital right now watching this to buy 32 Bitcoin, God bless you, because I would say go for it. But I mean, that at the end of the day isn't going to move the market either. So I think the amount of capital that needs to go into Bitcoin on a daily, weekly, monthly basis is just simply like we just don't have that much influence just yet. Just yet, though, Robin. Just yet. Maybe we will in the future. But even then, too, right? I mean, hopefully during that time, Bitcoin's like a $10 trillion asset, and if we have that influence, it's not going to really skyrocket it right off the bat, right?
I also think so. Really fun conversation, I guess so. Really cool. One thing I want to get also your take on is, what do you think is the most interesting things Bitcoin are doing that has nothing to do with Bitcoin at all? I heard that thing recently, and I was like, that's a fascinating question. Because you talk with a lot of Bitcoiners, you do a lot in Bitcoin. What's that?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I think, like, just the development of these circular economies to help out, spending Bitcoin in various places. I think what Cash App has done has been, one of the most unheralded stories of 2026. I mean, they essentially just are like one of the biggest merchants in the United States that just opened up the floodgates to allow people to pay in Bitcoin. I mean, I was in Austin, Texas not too long ago, and I went and played paddle, where I rented the paddle, boards for $20 US, but I was able to pay in Bitcoin because they had a Square terminal there. So I think that's very interesting. I think a lot of businesses, I mean, at the end of the day, I think if you're a small business owner, it just gives you more tailwind as well to grow a business. I mean, my dad is a small business owner, so I'm very passionate about people growing that. And I think that's the true blood of the economy, just globally, right? I mean, it helps with the decentralization. It lets us to allow to have great products and services and not just get swallowed up by these big guys. So what I'm most bullish on is not only people spending Bitcoin, but the small carpenters, air conditioned people, all of these people who are now accepting Bitcoin or accepting cash and putting a little bit of Bitcoin on their balance sheet, even at a small level, I think will just make society as a whole 10 times better down the line. And I think, when it comes down to that, that makes me extremely bullish on what's going forward, because now we have a lot of, I guess, good headed entrepreneurs in the market. And, it allows you to make different decisions, make a little bit more risks, and really try to pursue something that maybe might not be the most fruitful initially, or take some risks, live life in a better light, go travel. I mean, without Bitcoin, I wouldn't have been able to do what I'm doing right now, just simply because it's very difficult to fly to all these places and everything like that. So Bitcoin truly changed my life just by putting it on my own personal balance sheet over time. And I'm extremely bullish watching others do the same. So I think, not only creating these circular economies to get ready for, what I see as these next 20 to 30 years of really becoming, the medium of exchange, and changing from that digital gold narrative and moving it into more of that, the peer-to-peer electronic cash that Bitcoin was truly created to be. I think just right now, right? I mean, we're seeing a lot of interesting things with companies, and, Sailor obviously is at the forefront of all of that.
Yeah, really cool. Thank you so much, Brandon. Was a fun one, and I'm just looking at like strategy. I'm looking at all the things that are going on in the world with strategy, with Strive, with Bitcoin, with the Clarity Act in Europe. You're currently in Europe, so I'm I'm really looking forward to what's being possible in Bitcoin in the next couple of weeks, months, and years ahead. It will be amazing. Don't over leverage, guys. Don't do crazy shit with your Bitcoin, and you will most likely be very, very, very fine. I would say.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I mean, what's going on in Europe too is pretty interesting. I mean, we're seeing, the EU, the ECB kind of come out against Bitcoin, but a lot of these banks now, a lot of large banks are starting to say, "Hey, you know what? I think it was like 37 banks have all joined together forces to try to create a euro stable coin because they're looking at, trying to get away from the potential of a central bank digital currency here in the EU. And a lot of these banks here are also putting Bitcoin on their balance sheets. So I think like, all over the world, you're seeing just extremely bullish signals. So I don't know how you can't be bullish towards the end of this year, Robin. I mean, I think we're going to start to see, Bitcoin's price start to reflect that. We're just having a little bump in the road as Bitcoin loves to give us, right?
It humbles us. Bitcoin always humbles us, and that's a good thing, I think, for the whole sector, for you and me, and for everyone involved. Thank you for watching this video. This was only a snippet of the podcast, and if you want to watch the full episode and get all of the context of this episode, you can click right here or here. Oh, maybe also here.